I'm Jenny Sharman.
And I'm Rosie Snowden.
And we both work for Yorkshire Peat Partnership. And that involves restoring peatlands, which is what you can see behind me here. So this is our playground.
So I'm a peat projects manager. So I started as a trainee with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust about 6 years ago and joined the Peat Partnership 5 years ago and have continued ever since.
And I'm a project officer for a programme called Pennine Peat Life. And what I get involved in is much more about working on the land with contractors, trying to actually work out what we need to do to restore the peat, because we have an awful problem with degraded peatlands in Yorkshire. So over the last 10 years, we've found some really effective ways of restoring our peatlands. And we're going to spend today just showing you exactly what we do and why peatlands are so important.
Cotton grass still in flower.
Oh, brilliant. It's really lovely, isn't it?
This amazing carpet of bright green is sphagnum moss, and that is the most important species in blanket bog in our peatlands up here. It's an absolutely incredible kind of moss, a really special kind of moss that has a really amazing ability to hold loads of water, 20 times its own mass in water in fact.
So yeah, on a healthy bog like this one, you'll be able to see all these other dwarf species as well, dwarf shrub species they're called, like the heather, which everyone's probably familiar with, this beautiful flowering plant that we see across all of the moorlands. And then if you're really lucky at a special time of year, you'll get all of the ones that come up with berries. So you'll have, like this one is a bilberry, this one over here is a cranberry, and you've actually got a little berry there, tiny little berry, really, really delicious. And you've also got crowberry as well. And then you have this plant too, which is called bog asphodel. And unfortunately it's just finished flowering now, but normally it will cover the area with these beautiful carpet of yellow flowers. So yeah, very, very species rich.
So what I'm sat here with now is common cotton grass, which is one of the many different species we find out on the peat bogs. It likes these particularly waterlogged conditions, and this got this lovely little seed head, which is like cotton wool.
Okay, so somewhere around here, I think there's some sundew.
Oh yeah, look,
oh,
here.
Brilliant,
here.
Brilliant, brilliant. Oh wow.
Yeah.
And it's in flower as well. Look at that.
Yeah, it's so pretty.
Yeah,
so this is sundew, which is a carnivorous plant. So it produces this sticky membrane, and if we look closely, we might even be able to see an insect. So they use the sticky substance to lure and trap insects, which is pretty crazy for just a site in Yorkshire that we have these kinds of species. Yeah, it's really cool.
It is. Look, there's one.
Yeah.
But what is it that all these species are actually growing on? Well, it's this, peat. And you can actually see in here, this is formed from the very species themselves. They're just decomposing very, very slowly, which forms this incredibly acidic soil. And the reason for this very, very slow decomposition is that this area is so waterlogged because of the amount of rain that we get in Yorkshire. So that's actually what creates the conditions for this to grow. With all of the water on the ground, there's no oxygen that's actually getting into the soil. So it just means that it just decomposes incredibly slowly, and it just forms this extraordinary soil.
And because of the way it forms and the plants within it that are stored there, this is actually just carbon stored in the ground. So the plants are drawing in the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and locking it away in the ground. The problem is that the vast majority of our peatlands in Yorkshire don't look like this, and they're in a very bad way indeed.
It looks more like this. And the problem with that is that all of the carbon that is being stored in this peat is actually being released into the atmosphere. It no longer has its protective cover of vegetation. And as soon as it comes in contact with the air, with the oxygen, it becomes carbon dioxide and it just releases up into the atmosphere, which is clearly bad news for climate change.
On this site, we've got a big problem with these huge gullies running all across down through the site. So this one must be 4 metres deep. So if you can imagine, originally the peat will have been to the top of the gully. This would have been full of peat, and that has completely disappeared, washed down the water system, and with that releasing all of that carbon.
So as well as the gullies that we have on site, which are basically the two sides of a channel, we'll also get things like this, which are called hags. And it's kind of just like one side of a gully. They can stand on their own, they're kind of isolated, but they can be just as tall, like this one here, which again is probably about 3-4 meters high. So again, you can imagine all this peat would have been above my head, and again, all of that has washed away, all of that carbon has gone. Now, the interesting thing about this one here as well is that you can actually see the different layers of vegetation. So if I pull this out, you can actually see it's a fibrous layer. This was probably, it could have been a cotton grass, I think, and that would have been growing hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So it's quite interesting that you can see the layers of history in the peat.
So why on earth should we care about any of this, all of this erosion? Well, first of all of the plants and animals, all of the birds, the reptiles, the mammals, everything that lived here was pretty much gone before. They'd all left because the habitat was so bad. So if we care about them, we should care about peat. So this lake you can see here behind me is Summerwater, and it's one of Yorkshire's largest natural lakes, and it's actually really important. It's a special site for wildlife. It's designated, and it's also really important for the people in the area that visit it and use it for recreation. But it's under threat from a variety of different things, but one of the main things is this degraded peatland, because all of the water on here drains into a few gullies, which then drain into the beck down in the valley, and all the eroding peat and carbon and everything that's pouring off this peatland is ending up in Summerwater. So we really need to help protect it.
This is another example of what happens on a degraded peatland, and although we've got these restoration features in now, I think this really shows you how much sediment can come off a site. Where I'm standing or sitting, there is actually another layer of coir underneath me, so it's totally submerged in sediment. When this was put in, it was just a gully, and now it's started to fill up with sediment, as you can see, all the way across. But if you can imagine, before this was put in, all of that sediment, tons and tons of it, would have just been going straight down into the valley. And the problem with that is that down there is the River Wharfe. And now that is a very critical river for our water companies. That is where we get our drinking water from. But also just imagine all of the animals that live and depend on that water. They'd just be inundated with all of this peat, which would cause a lot of suffering. So that's another really good reason why we need to keep the peat up here.
So I'm now here in the beautiful Upper Wharfedale with the River Wharfe flowing past me here. But if we look closely, we can see that the colour of the water is not crystal clear. It's actually a brown, quite a dark brown colour. The coloration is from the dissolved peat, the dissolved carbon, it's in the water. And this costs the water companies a heck of a lot of money to clean it and make it clear before it comes out of our taps. So it's just another reason why we need to protect the peat bogs and keep the peat up on the hills there.
But if that isn't enough to persuade you that we really need to look after our peatlands, then just remember how much carbon is being released from peatlands that are damaged. Peatlands store in Britain 3 billion tonnes of carbon. Now that is equivalent to all of our forests in Britain and all of the forests in France as well. So you could say that peatlands were like our Amazon, and you know that we wouldn't want to be cutting down the Amazon forest. So yeah, we need to look after our peat.
Talking of forests, if we look down here, we've got this perfectly preserved tree, which is pretty amazing. You can see so much detail. And we can estimate how old this tree is because we know how long it takes for peat to form. So to form 1 millimetre of peat takes about a whole year. So we can estimate that this tree is 4,000 or 5,000 years old, which is absolutely incredible.
So what's caused all of this peat to start to disappear? Well, it all starts with the loss of vegetation. Once that goes, then the ground is just so much more susceptible to erosion. So one of the main reasons why peatlands are so damaged in Yorkshire is because of what you see here. Now this is a ditch that was dug in the 50s and 60s, post-World War II, when the government wanted to have as much of the land as possible in the UK productive, good farmland. So they thought this land up here would be ideal for sheep, but it was a bog, so they had to drain it. So that's why the farmers were encouraged to put these grips in, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do, and they drained the land. But the problem was that then caused a change in all of the vegetation around it, and it also meant that all of this water was now pouring off down the hillside and not being kept up here, which dried the peat. Another thing that destroys the vegetation and dries the peat is fire. As we've seen from the fires that have burnt across moorlands all over the country, this is extremely damaging and also leads to large areas being eroded. In the past, we never realised how important peatlands were to us or how much damage we'd cause by the way we managed them. But now that we do, we need to do everything we can to fix them. And that's where Yorkshire Peat Partnership comes in. And the first thing that we want to do is to try to change the hydrology of the land. We need to try to stop all of that water that's flowing off this moor. And one of the things that we can do to help that is put in a peat bund into these grips that originally just pulled water off down the hillside. And as you can see, they're already beginning to pond water behind them. They're very effective. So we can even use peat bunds in these much larger gullies. As you can see here, there's one there that's blocking all the water and another one higher up. And if you can imagine, all of this water that's collecting behind them here would otherwise be going off down to Summer Water, which is down there, and doing all of the damage that it does, polluting and pulling up roads and flooding farmers' fields. But we're managing to keep it all up here. And the other thing, these have only been in for just over a year, and you're already beginning to see the sphagnum coming back, cotton grasses. There's a lovely dragonfly there, look at that, an emperor dragonfly. So it's also providing water and a home for species, for a really lovely habitat for other species. And one of the things as well that's really important to recognise is that peatlands don't only contribute to climate change when they're damaged, but they will also be affected by climate change. So the wetter we can make them now, like this, the more protected they'll be when we start getting those drier summers and less rainfall. Then the water that's up here now is going to do a lot to protect them. It's really important.
When we get down into some of these bigger gullies, we have to bring in materials in order to deal with the hydrology. So we can't use peat dams like we saw before because of the amount of water that's coming down and the size of the gullies. So we use a variety of different materials. So what we can see here is big timber dams, These are really effective at holding back water. As we can see, there's a heck of a lot of water here, even more than we anticipated, and the other week it was actually flowing over the top. So yeah, we need more than peat to hold back the water here.
On this site, there's about 8 kilometres worth of eroding gullies that are suitable for timber dams. This amounts to about 1,000 dams across a 100-hectare area. And amazingly, within days they're doing their job and beginning to change the hydrology of the site.
Well, I think people will be firstly surprised at the amount of water that's actually held up here. Obviously, the amount of rain that's coming down and the water that's held. Villages and small towns that don't have area to hold it, floodplains, just if you don't hold it up here, you can't stop it when it gets downhill. So these timber dams that we're building should hopefully hold off quite a lot of the water and stop flooding downstream.
Josh is one of the team that's been involved in constructing these dams, and I really take my hat off to them. It's not an easy job to do, as the conditions are just so challenging.
Oh well, first and foremost it's the weather really. The weather can be like this, or it can be dire, and you're just facing all different types of weather up here. Obviously carrying big boards of timber around it's quite a struggle with the wind. 50-mile-an-hour plus winds all week, so we'll just have to see how it goes really.
Then there's the peat itself.
Yeah, you're looking a foot deep, if not more in most places. So
Getting the dams into running channels of water over unstable layers of eroded peat presents its own unique challenge.
Owen keeps falling over, which is brilliant. It lightens the mood a little bit when he's sat down and we're all laughing at him. So
oh, honestly, you're carrying a bit of wood from literally like 10 metres and you're sinking, and you're like, oh no, this is not the day for it, but it's all right. You get out of it in the end, get on with it.
So once the timber dams have been in for a while, this is what you want to see. You've got all the cotton grasses that are starting to come back again. There's a nice pond of water behind it, and also all the sediment that's collecting behind it. All of that, if you imagine, would have just been washed straight away and into the gullies and down into summer water. So yeah, this is what you want to see. They're doing their job.
So this here is another material we use for blocking some of these smaller channels and flatter areas where the water flow isn't as strong. This log type thing is made of coir, which is actually coconut husk fibre, all the way over from Sri Lanka, but it's a waste product over there, so we're making good use of a waste product and from Sri Lanka and restoring peat bogs in Yorkshire. So up here behind it we've got, like, it's nearly up, more than halfway up the log, full of peat sediment that this dam has trapped, and because it's slowed the flow of water, we've got cotton grasses growing back already, bits of heather and things coming back, so this soon will be completely covered in vegetation.
So what's really interesting as well is that in addition to the water being held back and the sediment, these coir logs look like they have been a real focal area for birds. There's lots and lots of droppings along the coir and a lot of evidence of bird activity. It's possible as well that all of the insects will have been converging on this area, which would be nice and wet during the dry season, the dry bits that we had earlier on in spring. So that's really good, really exciting, and one of the benefits, I guess, of re-wetting the moors, bring back all of those invertebrates, which will in turn bring back the owners of this. I'm up on Fleet Moss today, and it's going to be a really busy day. As you can see behind me, the helicopter is on standby, and there's 500 tons of stone busy being sorted to get into the bucket for the chopper to carry out onto the site. 333 odd stone dams that are going to be built in the next few days, And you can also see a load of koya behind me. That's also got to get up. So we've got a busy few days ahead. Hopefully the weather's going to be kind to us. At the moment it's really windy, so not quite sure how much we're going to get done today, but hopefully, fingers crossed. We're up and running. It's the koya that we're starting to fly out. There's about 1,000 logs. The guys are just getting into position behind me. Still very windy, but yeah, we're up. So the koya's all been done and they're getting ready now to load all the stone. Really smooth operation going on here. Very impressed. Standing in a gully that's about 3-4 meters deep, and it's eroded all the way down to the stone layer at the bottom. So for this sort of gully you need stone to block it, and that's what we've got here. This is a good well, each drop is 750 kilos worth of stone, so there's probably about 3-4 drops of stone here. And what it does, it will slow the flow of water as it comes down. And what you'll find is that all the sediment here, it starts to build up behind it. And that's exactly what you want. You just want to slow the flow of the water and block the sediment. And gradually, this gully will start to build up. We'll have to come back, put more and more stone on top, and gradually it'll come back up to the top of the landscape, but probably not in my lifetime. Getting the materials like the stone onto site has to be done by helicopter. It requires a lot of skill from the pilot and the crew on the ground to make sure they're placed correctly. After we've done as much as possible to slow the flow of water and keep it on the land, we then have to think about how to get the vegetation back. Remember the gully and hag sides? To get these to revegetate, you have to change the angle of the slope. So we get diggers to come in and do what we call reprofiling, where they physically change the angle to a more stable one that vegetation can grow on. So I'm actually sitting on a reprofiled hag at the moment, and you really wouldn't know. In fact, all of what's around me here has all been reprofiled, and it's now covered in what we call turfs. So turfing is a really particular way of revegetating the landscape, and it happens instantaneously. And what it is that the digger comes along, and as well as reprofiling the slope to that lovely angle, it'll scoop up the top layer of vegetation that's around it, and it places it down very, very gently and keys it in to the peat. So you've just suddenly got this wonderful carpet of everything that you can see around here. So you've got all the dwarf shrubs, you've got the cotton grasses, it's just instant revegetation. It's a fantastic process, and yeah, I love it.
So for areas of reprofiling that can't be turfed because there's not enough turf around, or it's just in too bad a state, we do what's called brashing, where we use this chopped up mix of heather that we can see here on this slope.
Yeah, so all of this sort of grey stuff was once growing heather, and it just forms this lovely layer. It's full of dwarf shrubs, it's full of moss, it's got bits of sphagnum in, bits of seed, and it just forms this lovely protective carpet over the bare peat. So when it pours with rain up here, which it does frequently, then this is all protected underneath. And what we start to find is that very soon after putting it on, this has only been here a few months, you start to get bits of grass coming through.
Yeah, we've got some bilberry here, little bits of moss, so it's already working.
And that for us is like a really, really exciting sign that our work is actually working. It's good, isn't it, Rosie?
Yeah, looks great.
Yeah.
So the final stage of the restoration is to bring back some of the species that we've lost on the peat bogs. So we plant plugs like this cotton grass and this sphagnum. So these have been grown in greenhouses, and we plant them out in the peat, and then they'll spread around. And these look quite good, don't they?
I think it's done really, really well. So that's only been in a few months, that sphagnum, and it's already expanded. I think it went in, it was about that big, and now it's doubled in size. So yeah, really happy with that. Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but when you start seeing things like this, Rosie, I just sort of feel like when the vegetation starts coming back, it's kind of like covering the whole of the site with a sort of magic cosy blanket that just protects it and kind of keeps in all that lovely carbon. And yeah, I kind of think, yes, job well done.
Yeah, it's really satisfying. It's like the final piece. Yeah, making it beautiful again.